The studio lights were hot, the kind of bright that made every expression feel magnified, every blink noticeable. Applause faded into an expectant hush as the hosts of The View shuffled their cue cards and adjusted in their chairs. Kevin Costner sat calmly at the far end of the table, hands folded loosely, posture relaxed but attentive. He had done this hundreds of times before, talk shows, press junkets, festival interviews, but there was something sharper in the air today, a subtle tension that hadn't been there when he first walked out to polite cheers and warm introductions. The conversation began innocently enough. Costner spoke about storytelling, about the responsibility of artists to reflect the world honestly without turning every project into a lecture. His voice was steady, thoughtful, the cadence of someone who didn't rush his words. The audience leaned in, some nodding, others simply listening. Joy Behar smiled as he spoke, tapping her pen against the table, waiting for her opening. When she jumped in, it was with a light laugh and a teasing remark that drew a few chuckles from the crowd. She reframed his point, adding her own interpretation, one that nudged the discussion toward politics and cultural divides. Costner didn't bristle, he smiled faintly, acknowledging the shift, and began to answer. "I think the danger," he said slowly, "is when we assume everyone watching a film or a show wants to be told what to think rather than invited to feel something." He barely made it halfway through the sentence before Behar interjected, her tone playful but insistent, steering it back to her angle. Costner paused, nodded politely, and waited. When she finished, he resumed, only to be cut off again seconds later. This time, something changed. Not anger, nothing so obvious, but a tightening around his eyes, a subtle stillness that replaced his earlier ease. The audience sensed it, that collective instinct people get when they know a moment is tipping towards something unscripted. Costner leaned back, took a breath, and then leaned forward again, closer to the table, as if grounding himself before continuing. "I'm happy to answer," he said, voice calm but firmer now, "but I'd like to finish my thought." The words weren't loud, yet they carried across the studio with surprising weight. A few audience members murmured approval. One of the co-hosts shifted in her seat, glancing between Costner and Behar, sensing the delicate balance slipping. Behar raised her eyebrows, half smiling, half challenging. "Of course," she replied, though the edge remained. "Go ahead." Costner nodded once, appreciative but unmoved, and continued. He spoke about growing up in a time when conversations happened face to face, when disagreement didn't automatically mean disrespect. He talked about listening, not as a performance, not as a pause before responding, but as a genuine act of respect. His words were measured, careful, but they landed with force precisely because of their restraint. As he spoke, the studio grew quieter. Even the background sounds, the rustle of paper, the faint hum of equipment, seemed to fade. Costner wasn't lecturing, he wasn't attacking. He was explaining, calmly, why he believed conversations broke down when people stopped allowing space for one another to speak. His gaze stayed level, occasionally flicking toward Behar, not confrontational, but direct. Behar attempted to jump in again, a quick quip forming, but Costner gently lifted his hand, palm open, not aggressive, just definitive. "Just a second," he said. The simplicity of the gesture was striking. No raised voice, no sharp words, just a clear boundary. The audience reacted instantly, a soft wave of applause rippling through the seats before anyone could stop it. Costner finished his point, concluding with a quiet line about respect being more powerful than volume. When he stopped speaking, there was a brief silence, the kind that feels heavier than noise. Behar smiled, a tight, thoughtful smile, and leaned back in her chair. For the first time since the exchange began, she didn't immediately respond. One of the other hosts quickly thanked Costner for his perspective, attempting to smooth the moment, but the shift had already happened. Costner leaned back as well, exhaling softly, his expression composed. He hadn't come to spar, and it showed. Yet in that brief exchange, he had redirected the entire tone of the table without ever appearing combative. The audience applauded again, louder this time, not out of spectacle but recognition. This wasn't a blow-up, it was something rarer, a firm stand delivered with calm authority. As the cameras continued to roll, the conversation moved on, but the energy in the room remained charged. Viewers at home would later rewind, replaying the moment when the balance tipped, when a Hollywood veteran reminded everyone watching that shutting down a heated exchange didn't require shouting, just clarity, patience, and the refusal to be talked over. The moment after the applause faded felt strangely suspended, as if the studio itself were holding its breath. The hosts exchanged quick glances, professional smiles settling back into place, but the rhythm of the show had undeniably changed. Kevin Costner sat quietly, hands resting on the table now, his posture open, unguarded, as though nothing extraordinary had just happened. Yet everyone in the room knew it had. The audience's energy buzzed, not loud, but alert, the way it does when people sense they've witnessed something real slip through the carefully managed boundaries of live television. Joy Behar cleared her throat and adjusted her glasses. For a beat, she seemed to consider her next move. She could press harder, turn the moment into a sparring match, or she could pivot. When she finally spoke, her tone was lighter, almost reflective. "Well," she said, "I think we can all agree conversations get passionate." A few nervous laughs followed. Costner nodded once, not smug, not triumphant, just acknowledging the olive branch for what it was. One of the co-hosts jumped in, steering the discussion toward Costner's latest project, praising his longevity in an industry known for chewing people up and moving on. Costner responded graciously, talking about collaboration, about crews and writers and the quiet pride of watching a story come together. But even as the conversation shifted, the earlier exchange lingered like a low hum beneath the surface. Every answer he gave now seemed sharper, not because of what he said, but because of how intently everyone listened. Behar watched him closely, her expression thoughtful. When she asked her next question, it was noticeably different, more measured, less pointed. She asked about legacy, about how he wanted to be remembered, and the question felt sincere. Costner paused before answering, a long pause that might have felt awkward earlier but now commanded attention. "I don't think about legacy much," he said finally. "I think about whether I showed up honestly in the moment." The simplicity of the answer drew quiet appreciation from the crowd. Behar nodded slowly, as if that response landed somewhere personal. As the segment moved toward its close, the tension eased but didn't disappear entirely. Instead, it transformed into something more complex, mutual awareness. The kind that comes after two strong personalities test boundaries and decide, consciously or not, where the line is. When the producer's voice echoed faintly through the studio, signaling a commercial break, the hosts smiled toward the camera, their practiced ease returning. Applause filled the room again, but this time it felt warmer, less reactive. During the break, the energy shifted behind the scenes. Crew members moved quickly, some stealing glances at Costner, others whispering to one another. A stagehand offered him water, he accepted it with a quiet thank you. Behar leaned toward one of her co-hosts, speaking softly, her expression unreadable. Whatever had happened on camera was now being processed off it, dissected in real time. When the show returned, the tone was noticeably calmer. Costner was asked one final question, something reflective, almost gentle. He answered with humility, crediting mentors, collaborators, even critics who had challenged him over the years. His voice never wavered. If anything, he seemed more at ease now than when he'd first sat down. As the segment wrapped, the hosts thanked him, and the audience rose into applause. Costner stood, shook hands, exchanged brief smiles. When he reached Behar, there was a moment, small, almost imperceptible, where their eyes met. She extended her hand, and he took it. No words were exchanged, but the gesture said enough. It wasn't reconciliation or victory, it was acknowledgement. Once he exited the stage, the buzz exploded. Phones lit up across the audience as people replayed clips, typed messages, and shared reactions. By the time the show finished taping, social media was already ablaze. Clips of the exchange spread rapidly, headlines forming within minutes, opinions hardening just as quickly. Some praised Costner's calm authority, calling it a masterclass in handling confrontation. Others defended Behar, arguing that lively debate was the lifeblood of the show. The moment became a Rorschach test, viewers seeing in it whatever they were primed to see. Costner, meanwhile, slipped into a waiting car outside the studio, the city noise rushing back in as the door closed. He leaned back, eyes briefly closing, not exhausted, just reflective. For him, the moment was already receding, another live exchange in a long career filled with them. He hadn't gone there to make headlines, and he wouldn't comment on them afterward. He knew how these cycles worked, fierce attention followed by swift distraction. Inside the studio, Behar finished the show with her usual wit, but those close to her noticed a quieter edge. Afterward, backstage, she addressed the moment briefly, brushing it off with humor, yet there was a seriousness beneath it. Live television, she knew, had a way of stripping things down to their essence. Sometimes that essence was messier than planned. By evening, the clip had been replayed millions of times. Commentators dissected Costner's tone, his posture, the raised hand that seemed to stop the room without aggression. Others analyzed Behar's reactions frame by frame. But what lingered for many viewers wasn't conflict, it was the reminder that strength didn't always announce itself loudly. Days later, the moment would still be referenced, quoted, debated. But in the end, it would settle into something quieter in the collective memory, a live exchange where tension flared, boundaries were drawn, and a heated moment was shut down not with anger, but with calm, unmistakable resolve.